I stood in the kitchen, the scent of coffee still lingering, when Victor slid the divorce papers across the table. His voice was steady, almost kind. "Maggie, I need my freedom." Freedom! After 45 years of promises, of stitching his dreams together with my own hands, he wanted freedom? Something cold settled in my chest. Not pain, not yet. Just a question I couldn't shake. What kind of man walks away from a lifetime without looking back? I stayed silent. Not because I was weak. I was watching. Welcome to the Betrayal Revenge channel, where stories come alive through voices you've never heard told this way before. Join us as we uncover the truth behind silent scars and hard-won justice. It all began 3 months ago, on a quiet morning I thought I'd never forget. The kitchen smelled of toast and the faint tang of lemon polish I'd used on the counters the night before. Sunlight slanted through the farmhouse windows, catching the edges of the old wooden table where Victor and I had shared countless breakfasts. I was buttering a slice of bread, my hands moving on instinct, when I heard the soft scrape of paper against wood. I looked up. Victor stood there, his gray eyes steady, holding a thin stack of papers. "Maggie," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I need my freedom." The words hung in the air, sharp and foreign. Freedom? After 45 years of marriage, of building a life from nothing, that's what he called it? I froze, the butter knife still in my hand, its cold metal pressing into my palm. Was something wrong with me? I thought. Had I missed a sign, a crack in the life we'd patched together? My heart didn't race. It slowed, as if trying to make sense of the impossible. I set the knife down, careful not to let it clatter. "Freedom," I repeated, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I looked at him, searching for something, an explanation, a flicker of regret. But his face was unreadable, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence stretched, heavy, like the air before a storm. I turned back to the toast, spreading the butter in slow, deliberate strokes. My hands didn't shake, though I half expected them to. What do you say to a man who's already decided you're no longer part of his story? I could have screamed, demanded answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he stood there, so certain, so untouched by the weight of what he was doing. Instead, I reached for the lunchbox I'd packed for him every morning for decades. A habit, a ritual. I folded the wax paper around the sandwich, ham and mustard, his favorite, and tucked it inside. The click of the latch felt louder than it should have. I slid the lunchbox across the table toward him, meeting his gaze. "I'll sign," I said, my voice steady now. "But not today." He blinked, just once, the smallest crack in his composure. For a moment I thought he might say something, explain, argue, anything, but he only nodded, picked up the lunchbox and walked out. The screen door creaked shut behind him, and the house fell silent. I stood there, alone, the divorce papers staring up at me from the table. The ink was fresh, the words clinical. Dissolution of marriage. My fingers brushed the edge of the paper, and I felt a chill, not from the room, but from somewhere deeper. How does a man wake up one morning and decide 45 years mean nothing? The question gnawed at me, quiet but insistent, like a splinter under the skin. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, I walked to the living room, where mainlanded steps to the old oak cabinet in the corner. The hinges groaned as I opened it, revealing the tin box I hadn't touched in years. My hands, rough from years of sewing, lifted the lid. Inside were our wedding photos, faded but clear. Victor, young and earnest, his arm around me, both of us smiling under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. I traced the edge of the photo, the memory sharp as a blade. We were just kids then, full of promises. The farmhouse was quiet, save for the faint tick of the clock on the mantel. Dust motes floated in the sunlight, and the air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I'd tucked into the drawers. I sat on the worn sofa, the photo in my lap, and let the memories flood in. Not just the good ones, the laughter, the late-night talks, But the moments I'd buried, the way Victor's praise had turned to silence over the years, the way he'd started calling me simple when he thought I wasn't listening. Had it always been there, this distance between us? I wondered, my thumb brushing over the photo. Or had I just been too busy loving him to notice? The question settled in my chest, heavy and unanswered, as I closed the tin and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I didn't know why Victor wanted out. Not yet. But as I sat there, the farmhouse creaking softly around me, one thing became clear. I wasn't going to let him erase me without a fight, not after everything I'd given. What kind of man walks away from a lifetime? I thought again, and this time the question wasn't just pain, it was a spark. What had changed in Victor to make him think he could just walk away? How do you measure a promise made when you were too young to know better? I sat there on the sagging couch, the tin box of photos open in my lap, the farmhouse quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The wedding photo stared back at me, Victor, barely 25, his grin wide and unguarded, and me, my hair pinned up, my dress simple but pressed crisp. We'd been so sure of each other then, or maybe I'd just been sure of him. I closed my eyes and the memories came rushing back, sharp as the scent of fresh-cut grass. It was 1965, and I was 20, working as a seamstress in a cramped shop in Portland's outskirts. The air always smelled of starch and cotton dust, and my fingers were calloused from needles and thread. I'd given up college before I ever had a chance to start. Not because I didn't want it. God, I'd dreamed of books, of lecture halls, of being someone who knew things. But Victor needed it more. He was the one with the big future, the one who'd make us proud. So I sewed dresses for other people's daughters, my paychecks going straight to his medical school tuition. I could still feel the weight of his hand in mine, the way he'd grabbed it one night outside the shop, his eyes bright with something fiercer than gratitude. "Maggie," he'd said, his voice low, "I'll pay you back for this. Not just money, I mean my whole life. You'll never regret it." I believed him. How could I not? He looked at me like I was his whole world, and I felt it, deep in my bones. Was that love, or just the blindness of youth? The farmhouse creaked, pulling me back to the present. I set the photo down and stood, my knees stiff from sitting too long. The living room smelled faintly of wood polish and the lavender I'd dried last summer. I walked to the window, the curtains soft under my fingers, and stared out at the garden where Victor used to read his journals. Back then, when he'd come home from school, he'd tell me about anatomy, about the miracles of the human body. I'd listen, my hands busy with mending, soaking up every word like it was a gift. I didn't understand half of it, but I didn't care. His voice was enough. But the years changed things. Victor graduated, became a doctor, then a professor. His world grew. Conferences, colleagues, people who spoke his language. Mine stayed small. The farmhouse, the sewing machine, the endless rhythm of keeping a home. He started calling me his anchor, but it didn't feel like a compliment. Not when he'd say it with that half smile, the one that made me feel like I was something he'd outgrown. "You don't need to know all that, Maggie," he'd say when I asked about his work. "Just keep being you. That's enough." Enough. I turned from the window, my reflection faint in the glass. My hair was silver now, my face lined with years of quiet compromises. I'd never asked for much, just his respect, his partnership, but somewhere along the way, I'd become invisible. When did his promises stop mattering? The question burned, hotter than I expected, and I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the steady thump of my heart. I walked back to the tin box, pulling out another photo. Us at a hospital gala, maybe 30 years ago. Victor in a suit I'd tailored myself. Me in a dress I'd sewn late at night. He'd been so proud that evening, introducing me as my Maggie. But even then, I'd felt it. The glances from his colleagues, the polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They'd talk about research, about ideas I couldn't follow, and Victor would steer me away, his hand firm on my elbow. "Let's not bore you," he'd say, and I'd nod, swallowing the sting. The air in the farmhouse felt heavier now, the silence pressing against my skin. I tucked the photo back into the box. my fingers lingering on the cold metal. I gave up everything for him, my dreams, my voice. And he'd taken it all, built his life on my sacrifices, only to walk away when I was no longer useful. The thought was bitter, like coffee left too long on the stove. I sat down again, the couch creaking under me. Outside, a bird called, sharp and fleeting. I thought of Victor's voice that morning, so calm, so final. I need my freedom. Freedom from what? From me? From the life we'd built? Or from the guilt of knowing he'd never paid me back? The question hung there, unanswered, as I stared at the tin box, its edges worn smooth by time. And then I remembered Clarice. The name slipped into my mind like a shadow, quiet but heavy. She'd been a widow for barely a year, her husband's death still fresh in the papers. Victor had mentioned her more often lately, his tone too careful, too casual. Clarice stopped by the office, he'd say, or Clarice sent me an article. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now with the divorce papers still on the kitchen table, it felt different. Was she the reason? I stood, my hands clenching at my sides. The farmhouse was still, but inside me, something was shifting. A promise made at 20 might not hold at 70, but what about the debt of a life? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to let Victor rewrite our story, not without me in it. But everything changed when Clarice became a widow. How do you love a child who sees you as a shadow? The question clawed at me as I stood in the farmhouse kitchen, the divorce papers still untouched on the table. The air smelled of stale coffee and the faint sweetness of the lavender drying on the windowsill. Outside, the Portland sky was gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I hadn't slept much since Victor left his bombshell, but it wasn't his words that kept me awake. It was Naomi's, my daughter, my only child. I'd raised her in this house, bandaged her scraped knees, sewn her prom dress, cheered at her graduation. I'd thought we were close, that she understood me, but now, as I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles pale, I wasn't so sure. When did she stop seeing me? The thought was a knife, twisting deeper with every memory. It was 2 days after Victor's announcement. The farmhouse felt too big, too quiet, the creak of the floorboards louder than usual. I was folding laundry in the living room, the scent of clean cotton grounding me, when the front door swung open. Naomi didn't knock. She never did anymore. Her heels clicked sharp against the wood, and I looked up to see her standing there, her face tight, her eyes avoiding mine. "Mom," she said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." I set the towel down, my hands steady despite the sudden weight in my chest. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. Naomi didn't sit. She crossed her arms, her designer coat catching the dim light from the lamp. She was 35 now, polished, successful, a marketing executive who moved in circles I'd never understand. I'd always been proud of her, but today she felt like a stranger. "It's about Dad," she said, her tone sharp, like I was a child who needed scolding. "You're holding him back. You always have." The words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I stood straighter, my eyes locked on hers. "Holding him back?" I repeated, my voice low, measured. "Naomi, he asked for a divorce. I didn't." She let out a huff, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Come on, Mom, don't play innocent. Dad's been miserable for years. He deserves to be with someone who gets him, someone like Clarice." Clarice. The name landed like a stone in my gut. I'd suspected her shadow in Victor's decision, but hearing it from Naomi made it real. Was my own daughter choosing a stranger over me? I took a slow breath, the air cool against my throat. "Clarice," I said, testing the word. "What does she have to do with this?" Naomi's eyes flicked away, but her voice didn't waver. "She makes him happy, Mom. She's educated, cultured. She understands his world. You—" She stopped, but the unspoken words hung there. "You don't." I felt the sting sharp and familiar, like the times Victor had dismissed me as simple. But from Naomi, it was different. It was betrayal. I stepped closer, the floor cold under my bare feet. "Naomi," I said, my voice steady but laced with something harder. "I gave up everything for your father, my education, my dreams. I worked so he could have his career. I raised you, and you think I'm the one holding him back?" She finally met my gaze, but there was no warmth there, only a cold certainty. "That's the problem, Mom," she said, her words cutting clean. "You gave up too much. You made him feel trapped. Clarice doesn't do that. She's his equal." Equal, the word echoed, bitter as bile. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see the years I'd poured into this family. But I didn't. I stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, the scent of lavender suddenly cloying. How had I raised a daughter who saw my sacrifices as chains? "Naomi," I tried again, softer this time. "I'm your mother. Don't you think I deserve a little respect for what I've done?" She sighed like I was exhausting her. "Respect?" she said, her voice sharp again. "Mom, you've had Dad for 45 years. Isn't that enough? Let him go. Let him be happy." She paused, then added, her words like a blade. "Clarice makes him feel alive. You don't." I froze, the air sucked out of the room. My daughter, my flesh and blood, stood there defending the woman who'd taken my place. I could still see her as a little girl, clinging to my skirt, her laughter filling this house, but now she was someone else, someone who believed I was the obstacle, the burden. What had I done to make her think I was worth so little? The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Naomi shifted, glancing at her phone, already half gone. "I have to go," she said, her voice flat. "Just don't make this harder than it needs to be, okay?" She turned, her heels clicking as she walked out, the door shutting with a soft thud. I stood there, alone, the laundry forgotten. The farmhouse was still, but inside me something cracked. I walked to the kitchen, my steps slow, and sank into a chair. The divorce papers stared up at me, Victor's signature bold and final. I thought of Naomi's words, her certainty, her betrayal. She thinks I'm nothing. The realization was cold, sharp, but it wasn't despair. It was fuel. I leaned back, my eyes tracing the familiar cracks in the ceiling. The scent of coffee lingered, faint but bitter. If my own daughter could turn her back on me, what else was Victor hiding? The question burned, brighter than my pain, and I knew I couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. But the real blow came when Victor and Clarice planned their wedding, and I wasn't supposed to be there. How do you stand in a room full of people celebrating the end of your life? The question pulsed in my chest as I stepped into the resort's grand hall, the air thick with the scent of lilies and champagne. The chandelier above glittered like a frozen waterfall, casting flecks of light across the polished floor. Laughter and music swirled around me, but I felt like a ghost, unseen, out of place. I shouldn't have been here, not at Victor's wedding to Clarice, not after everything, but something. Stubbornness, maybe, or a need to see it with my own eyes, had pulled me through those doors. The Portland coast was alive outside, the ocean's roar faint through the tall windows. I'd driven here alone, the farmhouse's quiet replaced by the hum of my old sedan and the weight of Naomi's words still ringing in my ears. "You don't belong here," she'd said 2 days ago, her voice sharp as she'd handed me a check for $200. "Go back to the countryside, Mom. They don't need you anymore." I'd taken the money, not because I wanted it, but because I needed to feel the paper in my hand, to know it was real. My daughter had paid me to disappear. Now, standing in the hall, I smoothed the front of my dress, a simple navy shift I'd sewn years ago, its stitches still perfect. My silver hair was pinned neatly, my face bare of makeup. I didn't look like I belonged among the glittering guests in their tailored suits and shimmering gowns, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to witness. The crowd parted slightly, and I saw them, Victor and Clarice, at the center of it all. He wore a charcoal suit, the one I'd made for him 25 years ago, its lines still sharp. I'd spent weeks on it, my fingers pricked bloody from late-night stitching. And there, at the cuff, barely visible, was the single blue thread I'd woven in. A lucky charm, I'd called it, laughing as I'd tied it off. He'd worn it today, for her. Clarice stood beside him, radiant in a cream gown that caught the light like seafoam. Her hair, still dark despite her 62 years, was swept up elegantly, and her smile was practiced, serene. She leaned into Victor, her hand resting lightly on his arm, and the guests cooed, their murmurs a soft hum of approval. Perfect couple. Second chance at love. I could hear their thoughts as clearly as if they'd spoken them aloud. I took a step forward, my shoes silent on the marble floor. Did I ever mean anything to him? The question burned, hotter than the shame creeping up my neck. I'd given him 45 years, my youth, my dreams, my heart, and now I was an outsider at his new beginning. The air felt heavy, scented with the cloying sweetness of flowers and the sharp tang of wine. I clutched my purse, its leather worn smooth from years of use, and forced myself to keep moving. That's when Naomi saw me. She was near the banquet table, a glass of champagne in her hand, her red dress clinging to her like a warning. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, and she set the glass down with a sharp clink. She crossed the room in quick, purposeful strides, her heels snapping against the floor. "Mom," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "What are you doing here?" I met her gaze, my own steady despite the tightness in my chest. "It's a wedding," I said, my voice calm, almost soft. "I was invited once, long ago." The words carried more weight than I'd intended, a reminder of the vows Victor had broken. Naomi's face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You need to leave," she said, her hand darting into her purse. She pulled out a wad of bills, $200 just like before, and pressed them into my palm. "Take this. Go home. Don't embarrass yourself." Her fingers were cold, her touch fleeting, like she couldn't bear to linger. I stared at the money, the paper crinkling in my hand, and felt something shift inside me, not pain, but clarity. My own daughter thinks I'm worth less than pocket change. I closed my fingers around the bills, not because I wanted them, but because I needed to feel their weight, to anchor myself. "Naomi," I said, my voice low, "do you know what this money feels like?" She blinked, caught off guard, but I didn't wait for an answer. "It feels like you're paying me to erase myself, to pretend I never existed." Her mouth opened, then closed, her eyes flickering with something, guilt, maybe, or annoyance. "Mom, stop," she said, her voice sharper now. "This is Dad's day. Clarice makes him happy. Why can't you just let it go?" Let it go. The words echoed, each one a small betrayal. I looked past her to where Victor was laughing with a guest, his hand still on Clarice's arm. The blue thread in his cuff caught the light, a tiny spark of memory. I'd sewn it with hope, with love, believing it would bind us through the years. Now it was just thread, meaningless to him. Was I ever more than that, a detail he could discard? I turned back to Naomi, my voice steady but cold. "I'm not here to ruin anything," I said, "but I'm not invisible, Naomi. Not to you, not to him." I pressed the money back into her hand, my fingers firm. "Keep this. I don't need it." Her eyes widened, but before she could respond, a voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Maggie?" It was Victor, his tone a mix of surprise and warning. He'd seen me. The guests nearby turned, their murmurs softening, curious. Clarice's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, her hand tightening on Victor's arm. I didn't move. I stood there, my spine straight, my eyes locked on his. The hall seemed to shrink, the chatter fading to a distant hum. He's wearing my suit, my thread, my years. The thought was a quiet fire, burning away the shame. I didn't belong here, but neither did he, not in the life he'd built on my sacrifices. "Maggie," Victor said again, stepping closer, his voice low, almost pleading, "please don't make a scene." His eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to me, and I saw it, the fear of being exposed, of losing the polished image he'd crafted. I smiled, small and sharp, the kind of smile that hides a storm. "A scene?" I said, my voice soft but clear. "Victor, I'm just here to see you start your new life. Isn't that what you wanted?" The words were polite, but they carried an edge, a challenge. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might say something real, but he didn't. He never did. Clarice stepped forward, her smile back in place, her voice smooth as silk. "Maggie, dear, why don't you join us for a drink? No need for tension on such a happy day." Her words were kind, but her eyes were cold, calculating. She was playing the gracious hostess, the perfect bride, and I was the inconvenience she'd rather forget. Can a woman like me, old, uneducated, invisible, turn the tables on those who betrayed her? The question simmered in my mind as I sat across from Jonah in a small diner just outside Portland. The air smelled of fried eggs and burnt coffee, and the vinyl booth creaked under me. Outside, the rain pattered against the windows, blurring the neon sign into a soft red glow. I'd driven straight here after the wedding, my navy dress still clinging to me, the memory of Victor's suit and Naomi's cold cash burning in my chest. But now, with Jonah's steady gaze meeting mine, I felt something new. Purpose. Jonah was young, 27, with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity that reminded me of the boy I'd known years ago. He was Clarice's grandson, technically, but he'd always called me Aunt Maggie, a title that carried warmth even now. His tie was loosened, his laptop open on the table, a half-eaten burger pushed to the side. "Aunt Maggie," he said, his voice low but firm, "if they forced you to sign anything unfair, we can fight it, but we need proof." Proof. The word was solid, like the weight of the sewing scissors I'd carried for decades. I leaned back, my fingers tracing the edge of my coffee mug, its ceramic warm against my skin. What did I have left to fight with? The farmhouse, with its creaking floors and faded photos, my memories, heavy but intangible, or the stubbornness that had kept me standing at that wedding, refusing to vanish? "I don't know what I have," I admitted, my voice steady despite the uncertainty curling in my gut. "But I know Victor's hiding something. He wouldn't walk away this cleanly unless he thought he'd already won." Jonah nodded, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the table. "He's a professor, not a saint," he said, a wry edge to his voice. "People like him don't leave without covering their tracks. We just need to find the cracks." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Start with the house, the bank accounts, anything he's touched. You've been in that farmhouse longer than he has. You know where the secrets are." The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the air felt thick with grease and possibility. I thought of the farmhouse, its oak cabinets, the locked drawer in Victor's study I'd never dared open. I'd spent years respecting his space, his privacy, believing it was part of love. Now, that trust felt like a trap. What had he hidden from me all this time? "I kept everything," I said, my voice low, almost a whisper. "Bills, receipts, old letters, even the mortgage papers from when we bought the farmhouse." I paused, my mind drifting to a memory, Victor signing those papers in 1978, his hand steady, his smile tight. I'd been so proud, thinking we were building a future. Now I wondered what else he'd signed without telling me. Jonah's eyes lit up, a spark of something fierce. "That's a start," he said, pulling a notepad from his bag. "And Clarice? She's not as untouchable as she thinks. I remember her thanking you once, years ago, for helping Victor through school. She wrote it down, didn't she? A card, a letter?" I froze, the memory sharp as a needle. It was 1985, a crisp fall day, the air smelling of damp leaves. Clarice had come to the farmhouse, her husband still alive then, her smile warm but distant. She'd handed me a card, her handwriting elegant. "Maggie, thank you for supporting Victor. Your sacrifices made him the man he is." I'd kept it, tucked in a box with birthday cards and Naomi's childhood drawings. I hadn't thought of it in years, but now it felt like a weapon. "I have it," I said, my voice firmer now. "It's in the attic with the rest of my things." My hands tightened around the mug, the heat grounding me. Could something so small really matter? The question lingered, but Jonah's nod was enough to push it aside. "Good," he said, scribbling a note. "We'll dig into the financials, too. If Victor's been moving money or rewriting agreements, there'll be a trail. And if Clarice is involved—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. I saw it then, the flicker of anger in his eyes. Not just for me, but for his own family's secrets. Clarice was his grandmother, but he wasn't blind to her. The diner's clock ticked loudly, marking the late hour. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, and the neon sign's glow felt softer now, almost comforting. I took a sip of coffee, its bitterness sharp on my tongue. My mind wandered back to the farmhouse, to the attic where I'd stored decades of my life, the boxes of photos, the files I'd organized without ever questioning the card from Clarice. I'd been so careful, so dutiful, preserving our history while Victor built his future without me. What else was buried in those boxes? "I'll start tomorrow," I said, my voice steady, resolute. "I'll go through everything, every paper, every note. If there's something to find, I'll find it." Jonah leaned back, a small smile tugging at his lips. "That's the Aunt Maggie I know," he said, his voice warm but edged with steel. "You're not just fighting for money, you know. You're fighting for your story. Don't let them take that from you." His words settled over me, heavy but empowering. I thought of Naomi's betrayal, Victor's cold dismissal, Clarice's polished smile at the wedding. They'd all tried to erase me, to make me small, but I wasn't small, not anymore. I set the mug down, the clink loud in the quiet diner, and met Jonah's gaze. "I won't," I said, my voice low but fierce. "They don't get to decide who I am." The waitress passed by, her apron rustling, and the scent of fresh pancakes drifted over, sweet and fleeting. I glanced out the window, the rain-slicked street reflecting the diner's lights like a mirror. My reflection stared back, silver hair, lined face, but eyes that burned with something new, resolve. I'd spent my life building Victor's world. Now I'd rebuild my own. As I drove back to the farmhouse that night, the road dark and glistening, I felt the weight of the task ahead. The attic, the papers, the secrets. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. If I could find the truth, could I make them see me? The question was a quiet fire guiding me home. Maggie didn't know it yet, but her search would spark a fire she never expected. What happens when the world hears a story you were too afraid to tell? The question hung in my mind as I sat in the farmhouse's attic, surrounded by dusty boxes and the faint smell of old paper and cedar. The single bulb overhead cast a soft glow, its light pooling on the worn floorboards. My hands were smudged with dust, my silver hair loose and sticking to my neck from hours of sorting. Receipts, letters, photos, decades of my life, neatly packed away, now spread out like pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. It had been a week since my meeting with Jonah. The farmhouse had become my fortress, its creaking walls and familiar scents, lavender, wood polish, the faint tang of rust from the old pipes, grounding me as I dug through the past. I'd found Clarice's card, its ink faded but legible, tucked in a box with Naomi's childhood drawings. "Maggie, thank you for supporting Victor. Your sacrifices made him the man he is." I'd stared at it for a long time, the words both a balm and a blade. I'd also found the mortgage papers, bank statements, and a strange amendment to the house's title, dated just months ago. Victor's signature was there, bold and careless. What was he planning? Jonah had been clear. We needed more than documents. We needed a story, one that couldn't be ignored. "People need to hear you, Aunt Maggie," he'd said, his voice steady over the phone. "Not just a judge, everyone. Record it, tell the truth. Post it where they can't look away." I'd hesitated, my heart pounding at the thought of exposing my pain to strangers. But then I'd remembered Naomi's cold eyes, Victor's suit with my blue thread, Clarice's smug smile. They thought I'd stay silent. They were wrong. I set up my old phone on a tripod in the living room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, painting the walls gold. The air smelled of the chamomile tea I'd brewed to calm my nerves, its steam curling up from the mug on the coffee table. I wore a simple blouse, my hair pinned back, my face bare but resolute. I pressed record, my hands trembling just enough to notice. "My name is Maggie," I began, my voice soft but steady. "And for 45 years I was Victor's wife. I gave up my dreams so he could have his. I sewed, I saved, I raised our daughter. and now he's left me for another woman claiming I was never enough. I paused, my throat tight, the weight of the words heavier than I'd expected. I'm not here to beg him back. I'm here to take back what's mine, my truth, my worth, because no one gets to erase me. I told it all, the sacrifices, the years of being called simple, Naomi's betrayal, the wedding where I was pushed out. I held up Clarice's card, reading her words aloud. I showed the mortgage amendment, my voice sharpening as I explained how Victor had tried to rewrite our history. This isn't just about money, I said, looking straight into the lens, my eyes burning. It's about justice, for me and for every woman who's been told she's not enough. When I stopped recording, my hands were shaking, but my chest felt lighter, like I'd exhaled a breath I'd held for decades. I uploaded the video to a forum Jonah had suggested, a space for women sharing stories of divorce and betrayal. I titled it simply, Then I Waited, the farmhouse quiet except for the tick of the mantel clock and the distant hum of crickets outside. By morning, my phone was buzzing, the screen lit with notifications. I sat at the kitchen table, the scent of fresh coffee grounding me as I scrolled. The video had 10,000 views, then 50,000. By the fourth day, it was at 2 million. Comments flooded in, raw and fierce. Maggie, you're a hero. This is my mother's story too. Don't let them win. Hashtags spread like wildfire, one a spark igniting a movement I hadn't expected. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, my fingers tracing the grain of the table. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and warm, but my mind was racing. Had I gone too far? The question flickered, but I pushed it aside. I thought of the wedding, of Naomi's money, of Victor's calm dismissal. This wasn't revenge. It was truth, and it was mine to tell. Then the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, a woman's voice on the other end, crisp and professional. Maggie? I'm Lena Carter, a journalist. I saw your video, your story. It's not just yours. It's millions of women, forgotten, dismissed. I want to help you tell it. Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me into a world I'd never imagined. She asked questions about Victor, Clarice, the documents, and I answered, my voice steady, the farmhouse's familiar walls giving me strength. As I hung up, I walked to the window, the garden outside lush from recent rain, the air carrying the sharp scent of wet earth. My reflection stared back, older, lined but alive. The internet was buzzing, Lena's article already drafting, and the world was asking questions. Why did Clarice marry Victor so soon after her husband's death? The murmur was growing, and I felt it, a shift, like the ground moving beneath my feet. I turned back to the kitchen, the divorce papers still on the table, untouched. I didn't need to sign them yet, not until I had everything. If the world was listening, what else would they find? The question was a quiet flame, burning brighter with every view, every comment, every voice joining mine. But the truth Maggie uncovered next would shake everything she thought she knew. How deep can a lie run before it unravels? The question gnawed at me as I sat in the farmhouse's living room, the late afternoon light filtering through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the worn rug. The air smelled of chamomile tea and the faint dust of old books I'd pulled from Victor's study. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the coffee table, notifications piling up since the video went viral. 2 million views had become 5, and the world wasn't just listening, they were digging. And so was I. Jonah had come by that morning, his laptop open, his face taut with focus. The farmhouse kitchen had become our war room, the table cluttered with papers, coffee mugs, and a stack of photos he'd brought. Aunt Maggie, he'd said, his voice low but electric, we've got something. He slid a manila envelope toward me, its edges creased from travel. My hands, rough from years of sewing, hesitated before opening it. What else could Victor have hidden? The question was a weight, heavy as the silence he'd left behind. Inside were photos, grainy but unmistakable. Victor and Clarice 2 years ago, at a cafe in Seattle, her hand on his arm, his smile too warm, too intimate. Another showed them at a hotel, their heads bent close, oblivious to the camera. My breath caught, not from pain but from clarity. This wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. I set the photos down, my fingers steady despite the storm in my chest. The kitchen smelled of the bread I'd baked earlier, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold truth in front of me. "There's more," Jonah said, his voice cutting through the quiet. He played a recording on his laptop, the audio crackling but clear. Victor's voice, smug and careless. "Kerr's to let her sign the papers. She won't understand a thing." I froze, the words slicing through me like a needle through fabric. Her, me, the woman he'd promised a lifetime to, reduced to a hurdle he could trick. The recording went on, Clarice's voice softer but sharp. "Just make sure the house is in your name. She doesn't need it." I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, the scent of coffee lingering in the air. The farmhouse felt smaller, its walls closing in with the weight of their betrayal. They'd planned this for years. I thought of the mortgage amendment I'd found, dated the day I'd been in the hospital for a routine checkup. Victor had visited me, brought flowers, smiled like nothing was wrong, and then he'd gone home and rewritten our life. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice low, steady, though my heart pounded. Jonah's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with something like guilt. "A friend of a friend," he said. "Someone who worked with Clarice's late husband. They've been sitting on this for a while, but your video, it gave them the push to come forward." I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of the photo, Victor's smile mocking me. The farmhouse's clock ticked loudly, marking the seconds as I processed it all. They thought I was too simple to fight back. The realization wasn't pain, it was power. I looked at Jonah, my eyes burning with resolve. "What do we do with this?" He leaned forward, his voice firm. "We go public. Not just the forum, everywhere. Lena's ready to run the story. She's got contacts at major outlets, but we need to be strategic. Victor and Clarice will push back, and they've got money, connections." He paused, his gaze softening. "Are you ready for that, Aunt Maggie?" I stood, my steps slow as I walked to the window. The garden outside was dappled with sunlight, the roses I'd planted years ago blooming despite neglect. The air carried the faint scent of wet earth, grounding me. Was I ready? I thought of Naomi's betrayal, the money she'd pressed into my hand, Victor's suit with my blue thread. I thought of Clarice's card, her hollow gratitude. I'd spent my life being quiet, dutiful, invisible. No more. "I'm ready," I said, turning to face Jonah, my voice steady as stone. "Let the world see who they really are." Within hours, Lena's article dropped, titled, "The First Wife's Fight, a Betrayal, Decades in the Making." It included the photos, the recording, the mortgage amendment, every piece of evidence laid bare. The internet exploded. Hashtags like and trended, comments pouring in. How could they do this to her? Maggie's a queen. Clarice isn't who she pretends to be. A news channel picked it up, then another. My phone buzzed with interview requests, but I ignored them, sitting instead in the farmhouse's quiet, the weight of the moment sinking in. I walked to Victor's study, the air heavy with the scent of old leather and ink. His desk was still there, untouched since he'd left. I opened the locked drawer I'd found the key to, a small victory, and pulled out more papers. Bank transfers, emails, a letter from Clarice dated 3 years ago. "We'll be together soon, darling. Just be patient." My hands shook, not with anger, but with certainty. They'd built their future on my ruin. That night I stood in the kitchen, the divorce papers spread out on the table. The farmhouse was silent, save for the soft creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of crickets. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I felt alive, electric, like the air before a storm. The world was watching, and Victor and Clarice were scrambling. What would they do when they couldn't hide anymore? The question was a spark, igniting the next step. Victor came to me, begging for mercy, but I had terms of my own. "What do you say to the man who stole your life when he begs for forgiveness?" The question hung heavy as I stood in the farmhouse's living room, the evening light slanting through the windows, painting the worn floorboards in hues of amber. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from the sachets I'd tucked into the curtains, but it did little to soften the tension. Victor stood before me, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with something I hadn't seen in years: fear. Clarice was there too, her polished exterior fraying, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. They'd come to negotiate, or so they thought. The viral storm had hit them hard. Lena's article, the photos, the recording, every secret they'd buried was now public, dissected on forums, news channels, and social media. Trended globally, and Clarice's carefully crafted image as the elegant widow was crumbling. Victor's academic circles whispered, his legacy tainted. They'd arrived unannounced, the crunch of their car on the gravel drive pulling me from the kitchen where I'd been sorting through more documents. I hadn't invited them in, but they'd pushed past the screen door, desperate. "Maggie," Victor began, his voice low, almost pleading. "This has gone too far. You're destroying everything. For what?" His hands gestured weakly, as if the answer might materialize in the air between us. He wore a wrinkled blazer, not the suit I'd sewn, and his gray hair was unkempt, a far cry from the polished professor I'd known. I stood by the oak cabinet, my arms crossed, my silver hair loose around my shoulders. The farmhouse was quiet, save for the faint tick of the mantel clock and the distant hum of crickets outside. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, let it press against them. For what? The question was almost laughable. I thought of the divorce papers, Naomi's betrayal, the blue thread in his cuff at the wedding. I thought of the years I'd spent invisible, my sacrifices dismissed as simple. For my dignity, I wanted to say, but I held back, watching. Clarice stepped forward, her cream blouse pristine despite the strain in her face. "Maggie, please," she said, her voice smooth but brittle like glass about to crack. "We're not here to fight. We can settle this quietly. No more articles, no more videos. Just tell us what you want." Her eyes flicked to Victor, then back to me, calculating. She was still playing the gracious hostess, but I saw the panic beneath it, the fear of losing everything she'd schemed for. I tilted my head, my gaze steady. "What I want," I repeated, my voice calm but sharp, cutting through the room like a needle through fabric. "You think I want your money? Your apologies?" I took a step closer, the floor creaking under my bare feet. The air felt heavy, the scent of lavender mixing with the faint must of old wood. "I want the truth, Victor, and I want what I earned, every penny, every moment you took from me." Victor's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with something. Guilt, maybe, or resentment. "Maggie," he said, his voice harder now, "I've given you a life, a home, Naomi. What more do you think you're owed?" He gestured around the farmhouse, as if the walls themselves were proof of his generosity. But I saw the cracks in his facade, the way his hands trembled slightly, the way Clarice's smile faltered. I laughed, a short, cold sound that startled them both. "A life?" I said, my voice rising just enough to carry the weight of 45 years. "I gave up college for you. I worked my fingers raw to pay for your dreams. I raised our daughter while you built your name. And you repay me by rewriting our history, by sneaking around with her." I nodded toward Clarice, whose face flushed red, "while I was in the hospital, trusting you." The room went still, the clocks ticking louder now, like a heartbeat. Clarice opened her mouth, but I raised a hand, silencing her. "Don't," I said, my voice low, unyielding. "I have your letter, Clarice, the one where you thanked me for making Victor who he is. I have the photos, the recordings, the bank transfers. The world knows what you've done, and I'm not done yet." Victor took a step toward me, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Maggie, please, I'll give you the house, the savings, whatever you want. Just stop this. You're ruining us." His eyes searched mine, but there was no remorse there, only self-preservation. I remembered his voice on the recording. "She won't understand a thing." He still thought I was that naive girl who'd sewn his future together. I stepped back, my spine straight, my eyes locked on his. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice steady as stone. "This isn't about your money or your reputation. It's about mine, my truth, my life. You don't get to take that from me and call it a favor." I turned to Clarice, whose hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles white. "And you built your happiness on my pain. You don't get to walk away clean." Clarice's lips parted, but no words came. She looked at Victor, then back at me, her composure cracking. "Maggie," she whispered, "I didn't mean—" "Enough," I cut her off, my voice sharp, final. I walked to the coffee table, where a single sheet of paper lay, a draft of the settlement Jonah had prepared. I picked it up, my hand steady, and held it out. "This is my offer. The house, half the savings, and a public acknowledgement of what you did. No negotiation. Sign it or we go to court. And trust me, Victor, the world is watching." He stared at the paper, his face pale, his hands clenching at his sides. Clarice's breath hitched, her eyes wide with something like defeat. The farmhouse was silent, the lavender scent faint now, overshadowed by the weight of the moment. I stood there, unshaken, my heart steady for the first time in months. They thought they could bury me. They were wrong. Victor reached for the paper, his fingers trembling, but he didn't take it. "Maggie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "don't do this." I smiled, small and sharp, the kind of smile that carries a lifetime of resolve. "I already have," I said. "You made your choice. Now live with it." The papers were ready, but would Victor sign, or would he fight to the end?
What does it feel like to close a chapter you never wanted to end? The question lingered as I stood in the notary's office, the air sharp with the scent of ink and polished wood. The room was small, clinical, its walls lined with framed certificates, and a single window letting in the pale Portland light. My hands rested on the table, steady, clutching a pen that felt heavier than it should. Across from me, Victor sat, his face drawn, his gray eyes avoiding mine. The divorce papers lay between us, their edges crisp, their words final. After 45 years, this was how it ended, not with screams or tears, but with signatures and silence. The notary, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense ponytail, shuffled through the documents, her pen scratching softly as she verified each page. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm grounding me. I wore a simple gray dress I'd sewn myself, its stitches precise, a quiet reminder of who I was. My silver hair was pinned back, my face bare but calm. I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Victor shifted in his seat, his blazer wrinkled, his hands clasped tightly as if to keep them from trembling. He hadn't wanted to sign, not at first. After our confrontation in the farmhouse, he'd stalled, his lawyer sending vague emails about further discussions. But the world was watching. The viral video, Lena's article, the photos, the recording, had become a movement, and Victor's reputation was crumbling. His university had distanced itself, his colleagues whispering, Clarice's book deals evaporating. He had no choice left. "Maggie," he said now, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Are you sure this is what you want?" His eyes flicked to mine, searching for a crack, a hint of the woman who'd once given him everything. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who knew her worth. I leaned forward, my gaze steady, unyielding. "What I want," I said, my voice calm but sharp, like the snip of scissors through fabric. "Victor, I wanted a partner. I wanted respect. You took that from me. This," I gestured to the papers, "is just what's fair." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of decades, of sacrifices he'd never acknowledged. He flinched, his jaw tightening, but he didn't argue. The notary glanced at us, her expression neutral, and slid the papers toward him. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "please review and sign here." She pointed to a line marked with a red tab, her voice as steady as the clock's tick. Victor hesitated, his fingers hovering over the pen. I watched him, my heart steady, my breath even. The air felt heavy, the scent of ink mixing with the faint must of the office's carpet. I thought of the farmhouse, its creaking floors and lavender-scented corners, the place where I'd built a life for us. I thought of Naomi's betrayal, Clarice's schemes, the blue thread in Victor's cuff. He thought he could erase me. The realization wasn't pain anymore, it was strength. He signed, his hand shaking just enough to notice, the pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. The notary took the papers, her movements brisk, and turned to me. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "your signature, please." I picked up the pen, its weight familiar, like the needle I'd wielded for years. My hand was steady as I signed, Margaret Ann Thompson, each letter deliberate, a reclaiming of my name. The notary stamped the documents, the thud of her seal final, unyielding. "Congratulations," she said, her voice softening. "It's official." Congratulations. The word felt strange, like a dress that didn't fit. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt free. I stood, smoothing my dress, my movements slow, deliberate. Victor remained seated, his head bowed, his hands clasped as if in prayer. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. He was no longer my story. The settlement was clear. $500,000, half the savings, and the farmhouse, mine in full. No alimony, no strings. I'd asked for what I'd earned, nothing more. I picked up my purse, its leather worn but sturdy, and walked to the door. The notary's office faded behind me, the cool Portland air hitting my face as I stepped outside. The sky was overcast, the scent of rain and sea salt sharp in my lungs. I didn't take Victor's offered ride. I didn't need his gestures anymore. I drove back to the farmhouse, my old sedan humming along the coastal road. The radio was off, the silence a comfort. My hands gripped the wheel, steady, sure. In the passenger seat sat my sewing machine, its case battered but intact, the only thing I'd brought from the notary's office. It was more than a tool. It was my history, my resilience, every stitch a testament to who I'd been and who I was becoming. As I pulled into the farmhouse's gravel drive, the familiar creak of the gate welcomed me. The roses in the garden nodded in the breeze, their petals bright against the gray sky. I stepped out, the air cool against my skin, and carried the sewing machine inside. The house smelled of wood polish and chamomile, its warmth wrapping around me like an embrace. I set the machine on the kitchen table next to the divorce papers, now signed, now mine. I stood there, the silence soft, the weight of the past lifting. What does freedom taste like? I wondered, and for the first time I knew. It tasted like rain, like salt, like the quiet pride of standing tall. I wasn't Maggie, Victor's wife, anymore. I was Maggie, period, and that was enough. But the farmhouse held more than memories. It held a new beginning. What does it mean to rebuild a life from the ashes of betrayal? The question bloomed in my mind as I stood in the farmhouse's garden, the morning sun warming my face, the air rich with the scent of blooming roses and freshly turned earth. The Portland countryside stretched around me, a patchwork of green fields and distant pines, the ocean's faint roar a steady heartbeat in the background. My hands, rough from years of sewing, gripped a pair of pruning shears, their metal cool against my skin. I snipped a wilted bud, its petals falling softly to the ground, and felt a quiet satisfaction. This was mine, my land, my home, my second chance. The divorce was final, the ink dry on the papers that gave me the farmhouse and $500,000, my share of a life I'd built for Victor. I'd moved back into the house alone, its creaking floors and lavender-scented corners welcoming me like an old friend. At first, the silence had been heavy, each tick of the mantel clock a reminder of what I'd lost, but then I'd started to see it differently. The farmhouse wasn't a relic of my past, it was the foundation of my future. I'd begun small, turning the overgrown garden into a thriving patch of vegetables and herbs. The work was hard, my back aching as I hauled soil and planted seeds, but it was honest. The earth didn't judge me for my lack of degrees or my silver hair. It rewarded my effort with crisp lettuce, ruby tomatoes, and basil that scented the air like a promise. I'd wake at dawn, the sky pink and gold, and lose myself in the rhythm of weeding, watering, harvesting. The farmhouse's kitchen became my sanctuary, the scent of baking bread and simmering soups, filling the space where Victor's cold words had once lingered. With the settlement money, I'd taken a leap. The farmhouse's barn, once a storage space for Victor's old journals, was now a small restaurant. Maggie's Table, I called it. I'd painted the walls a soft cream, hung fairy lights, and set up wooden tables I'd sanded myself. The menu was simple: farm-fresh salads, hearty stews, pies made with berries I'd picked from the nearby woods.
I cooked, I served, I smiled at the locals who came, curious at first, then loyal. The air in the barn smelled of rosemary and warm pastry, and the chatter of guests was a new kind of music, replacing the silence of my old life. One evening, as I wiped down a table, the scent of apple pie still lingering, a woman approached me. She was young, maybe 30, her eyes bright with something like awe. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. "Are you Maggie? The Maggie from the video?" I paused, the rag still in my hand, and nodded. The movement hadn't faded. My story still circulated, a beacon for women like her. "I just wanted to say," she continued, her voice trembling, "your story saved me. I was in a marriage that felt wrong. I thought I had to stay, to be quiet. But you showed me I could walk away, start over." She handed me a letter, her handwriting neat on the envelope. "This is for you, from me and a few others. You're not alone." I took the letter, my throat tight, and thanked her, my voice steady but warm. Later, alone in the farmhouse's living room, the fire crackling softly, I opened it. Inside were notes from women across the country. "Maggie, you gave me courage. I left my husband because of you. Thank you for reminding me I'm enough." The paper crinkled in my hands, and I felt a warmth spread through me, deeper than pride. I hadn't just rebuilt my life, I'd helped others rebuild theirs. The farmhouse was alive now, its walls no longer holding ghosts. I'd hung new curtains, sewn from fabric I'd chosen for myself, their soft blue brightening the rooms. My sewing machine sat in the corner, no longer a tool of sacrifice, but a symbol of creation. I made aprons for the restaurant, tablecloths, even a quilt for the guest room, each stitch a reclamation of my skill, my worth. One afternoon, as I kneaded dough in the kitchen, the radio humming softly, a young woman entered the restaurant. She was a reporter, her notebook tucked under her arm, her eyes wide as she took in the space. "Maggie?" she said, her voice eager. "I'm writing a piece on local businesses. But when I saw your name, I knew you're the woman from the viral story, aren't you?" She paused, her smile genuine. "You're the strongest person I've ever met." I laughed, a soft sound, and dusted flour from my hands. "Strong?" I said, my voice warm but firm. "I'm just me, a woman who kept going." I offered her a slice of pie, the crust golden and flaky, and we talked about the restaurant, the garden, the life I was building. She scribbled notes, her pen moving fast, and I felt a quiet pride. This was my story now, and I was writing it. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I stood on the farmhouse porch, the air cool and scented with pine. The restaurant's lights glowed behind me, the laughter of guests drifting out. I held a mug of tea, its steam curling into the evening, and let the moment settle over me. The farmhouse wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home, a haven, a testament to what I could create when I stopped letting others define me. What did I lose to gain this? The question was soft, not painful, as I sipped my tea. I'd lost a husband, a daughter's love, a version of myself I'd clung to for too long. But I'd gained something greater, myself, whole and unbroken. The farmhouse stood strong, its roots deep like mine, and I knew as the stars began to peek through the dusk that this was only the beginning. But Maggie's journey wasn't over. She had one final truth to face. What does it mean to finally be enough? For yourself? The question settled over me like a soft blanket as I stood on the farmhouse porch, the Portland sunset painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. The air was cool, scented with pine and the faint sweetness of the roses I'd tended back to life. My hands, rough from years of sewing and now gardening, rested on the wooden railing, its grain smooth under my fingers. The farmhouse behind me hummed with the quiet warmth of Maggie's table, my restaurant, where the last guests of the evening lingered, their laughter a gentle echo. This was my world now, built from my own hands, my own heart. The past months had been a whirlwind. The divorce, the viral video, the fight for justice, it had all led me here to this moment of stillness. The farmhouse, once a cage of memories, was now a sanctuary. Its creaking floors, lavender-scented corners, and sunlit windows held me steady.
a reminder of what I'd reclaimed. I'd turned the land into a thriving garden, the barn into a restaurant, my pain into purpose. Letters from women across the country still arrived, their words a chorus of strength. Maggie, you showed me I could start over. Your story is mine too. Each one was a thread, weaving me into a tapestry larger than myself. I stepped off the porch, my boots soft on the grass, and walked to the edge of the garden. The horizon glowed, the ocean's distant murmur a steady heartbeat. In my hands I held Victor's old vest, the one I'd sewn for him decades ago, its fabric worn but intact. I'd found it in the attic, tucked away with the last of his things, and for weeks I'd debated what to do with it. Burn it, maybe. Let the flames take the last piece of him. Or keep it, a reminder of the life I'd left behind. I'd even thought of cutting it apart, turning it into something new, like I'd done with so much else. I unfolded the vest, its weight familiar, the blue thread I'd stitched into the lining catching the fading light. This was mine once, I thought, tracing the stitches with my thumb. My love, my labor. I remembered the nights I'd spent sewing it, my eyes burning from the dim lamp, my heart full of hope for the life we'd build. Victor had worn it proudly then, his arm around me, his promises fresh. But promises fade, and so had he. Did I ever really know him? The question was soft, not bitter, a whisper of curiosity rather than pain. I walked to the fire pit near the garden, its stones blackened from use. The air was crisp now, the stars beginning to prick through the dusk. I set the vest on the ground, my movements slow, deliberate. I could burn it, watch it turn to ash, let the past go up in smoke. But as I stood there, the scent of earth and roses grounding me, I realized I didn't need to. Burning it would give Victor power he no longer deserved. Keeping it, though, that was different. It wasn't about him anymore, it was about me. I picked up the vest, folding it carefully, its fabric soft against my hands. I'd keep it, not as a shrine but as a marker, a piece of my history, not his. I'd tuck it in the attic, with the photos, the letters, the life I'd lived before I became this Maggie, the one who stood tall under an open sky. I don't need to destroy him to be free, I thought, and the truth of it was like a deep breath, filling my lungs with peace. I turned back to the farmhouse, its windows glowing gold, the chatter of guests drifting out. My sewing machine sat in the corner of the living room, its presence a quiet strength. I'd made new curtains, aprons, a quilt for the restaurant, each stitch a reclaiming of my craft, my identity. Maggie's table was thriving, the locals calling it a hidden gem, the reporter's article bringing in visitors from across Oregon. I cooked, I gardened, I listened to the stories of strangers who became friends. I was no longer Victor's wife, Naomi's mother, Clarissa's shadow. I was Maggie, whole and enough. As I reached the porch, I paused, my hand on the railing, and looked out at the horizon. The sun was gone now, the sky a deep indigo, the stars bright and unyielding. I thought of Naomi, who hadn't called since the divorce, her silence a wound that might never heal. I thought of Victor, somewhere with Clarisse, their lives diminished by their own choices. I didn't hate them. I didn't need to. Hate ties you to the past, I realized. I'm tied to now. I don't need revenge, I said aloud, my voice soft but clear, carried by the evening breeze. I just needed to be me, really me, for the first time. The words felt like a vow, not to the world but to myself. I wasn't defined by degrees, by titles, by the names others gave me. I was defined by my choices, my resilience, my heart. I stepped inside, the farmhouse wrapping me in its warmth, the scent of chamomile tea lingering from earlier. The fire crackled softly, its light dancing on the walls. I set the vest on a shelf, next to a jar of dried lavender, and smiled. The clock ticked, steady and sure, marking the start of a life that was mine alone. What comes next? I wondered, and for the first time the question wasn't fear, it was possibility. And so, Maggie's story became a beacon, not just for her, but for all who dared to reclaim their power.